I'm Lilian, and I've been practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the past 1.5 years.
Because I cannot pronounce Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I will say BJJ. But I'm curious, what got you interested in BJJ in the first place?
When I was in SF and doing my final semester or like final month there, my friend Eric invited me to go and try out a BJJ class in SF. We did like 3 classes together, and it was really fun, and I loved it. Then when I moved to London for my job, I met an old friend from secondary school who was also doing BJJ, and he was so in love with it. He's basically addicted to going to classes, and he invited me to go to his gym. So I started training, and yeah, it's made me really, really happy to go like every other day, and so I've just kept doing it ever since.
On a high level, I feel like each sport you play teaches you something on a higher level
Yes.
about like mindset or life. And so, what has that been for BJJ specifically?
Yeah. I used to run, and I used to run long distances because to me it was like a mental exercise to see how far I could go, like how much I could push myself. But doing BJJ is very different because it's about being very deliberate with your moves. It's not about going fast or going hard. It's about thinking while you're being crushed by another person or like on the spot and being able to adapt to anything that comes along. And I think this is really nice because it reminds me to like slow down and almost like think while also being able to be very adaptive to situations as they come, which is a really different mindset that I quite like.
I love that. I also didn't know that you ran, so that's also something new today. Um, for listeners, that's Ang Lilian. She is an alumni of Minerva University, which is, as I keep saying on the podcast, the number one most innovative university in the world. And there's a lot more to that, which I'm hoping we can unpack on this episode. Another fun fact about Lilian, which I'll add in, which is also a fun fact that applies to me, is that our university education takes us across 7 countries over the 4 years. So that's just one aspect of the innovativeness. Lilian did her degree in historical courses as well as data science and statistics. So very, very interesting combination. I'm also excited to pick your brain about that. But I think today we'll just be hearing more from her about the choices she's made, the lessons she's learned along the way, as well as I'm hoping this is a proper Minerva 101, like a Minerva concept introduction for all the high school listeners who are potentially interested. Like maybe they've seen an ad on Instagram, maybe they've gone to the website, and they're just curious to hear more and just break down every aspect of the Minerva model. So welcome to Uni Unveiled. I'm your host Arya Darur, also attending Minerva University. Welcome, Lilian. Super excited to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. And just sort of my quick intro before we get into a proper discussion on Minerva for listeners is to just note that this episode is slightly different structurally compared to the others. The others are more about a lot of personal opinions plus different aspects of the university experience. This episode is very much both an objective plus a kind of subjective deep dive into, as I said, the Minerva concept and the Minerva model. So we'll be breaking apart different aspects of how life and academics and social life works at Minerva. This episode will not cover everything. This is going to be a series, so we're going to get a few of Lilian's classmates as well on the episode. But just this episode is slightly structured differently. But hopefully by the end, you have a solid understanding of the Minerva concept. And for anyone further interested, if you're willing to go through a slightly more dry reading, the book is phenomenal, Building the Intentional University. This is supposed to be sort of a more accessible and digestible version of that book, which explains the whole Minerva concept through like 400 plus pages. But I'll dive right into it with you, Lilian. You're my senior by many years. You graduated in 2022. Currently, what are you working on?
Yeah, after I graduated, I started working for Blue Dot Impact as a product manager. So we run courses that support people towards a high impact career. We are particularly focused right now on AI safety and biosecurity. And we run these like free online 12-week courses that we've had hundreds and hundreds of people go through. And we've also run versions of our course for the UK Civil Service. My role there, I mainly build products and systems and software for them. Most notably, I guess, like our Course Hub, which is our learning management system. Or I guess, like as you'll hear later, it's like Minerva's forum, but for Blue Dot. I also design a lot of the automations and email campaigns, digital marketing. If you think of every course as a vertical, my role is a horizontal, where I like support all the course leads to be able to run their courses more efficiently.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting. And so this has been going on for since you graduated till the current day. It's been the same organization.
Yeah, basically. I think when I was going through the hiring process, they were called Effective Altruism Cambridge. And partway through that, they spun out and became their own organization. And I've been here ever since.
Lovely. And we will not be doing a deep dive into the global rotation on this particular episode. That will be for a future episode. But just because I mentioned it, I would love for you to say two lines about the global rotation. Plus, personally, you're in London, and so just would love to hear about how you feel London fits into the global rotation of these seven cities. Like, why do you think London is important from a Minerva model perspective?
Yeah, so the global rotation basically takes all its students in 1 year. So if you're in the class of like 2022, for example, we had 130 people, and all of us kind of like moved to different countries together with each semester. Because of COVID, our class only had 5 cities. So San Francisco, Berlin, London, Hyderabad, and Seoul, not in that order. And in terms of like how London fits into this and why they chose it, I'm not actually sure. I've not actually talked to Minerva to hear what it is, but based on being here, I think it is like a very cosmopolitan city. It is like a big hub for lots of people who want to do like finance, consulting, and lots of people want to work here. So in order to like immerse students in this like working environment and to see like a professional center of the world, maybe that's why they chose here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my thoughts are similar. I haven't been to London as such. Neither have I spoken to Minerva higher management about why. But I always find it interesting to think about why XYZ city specifically was included in the model. And so, especially being a local of Hyderabad, I've done a lot of thinking as to why it was Hyderabad versus other cities in India on the model. And so I think that's an interesting question to be thinking about and to be also asking Minerva management if that is of interest to a listener.
Well, I guess like when some of my other classmates had talked to Ben Nelson about including cities in Africa, because we don't have any like African cities in our global rotation, some of the things that Minerva does consider is like internet connectivity, like whether it's able to like support, because all of our classes are online, so be able to support like 100 people being online, having like calls. Safety, whether it's like politically stable in that area. And I think also maybe some amount of like connections to be able to have a bunch of university students from many different countries. So whether they're able to get visas and all these sorts of things is part of their consideration as well.
Mm-hmm. There's a very long list. I mean, there's safety and there's sort of religious tolerance, and there's so many which I think a city has to meet in order for like students from 100 change countries to be going there. There's even beyond just them being whatever tech hubs and cultural hubs, it also has to be feasible from a Minerva management point of view. And so that's also like a whole interesting discussion. Just so I'm clarifying, you mentioned 5 cities. I will add 2 more to the list, which unfortunately your class could not cover due to COVID.
Yeah.
Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I believe Taipei, Taiwan, correct? Perfect. Yes. That is our 7 cities, and we do 4 continents, minus Australia, minus Africa, and minus Antarctica, of course. Yeah. If I had to ask you, and I mean, this is an entire book has been written, so I'm sure it's not an easy question, but if you had to sum up your 4-year Minerva experience in like 2 or 3 sentences, what do you think those few sentences would be?
To me, at least, it's like best experience. I would not have wanted to be in any other university. I think when I graduated from secondary school and also from like college doing A-levels, I'd really wanted to study in a place where what I was studying made sense. I feel like in school, a lot of the things that you do is just memorizing or fact-based. When you ask your teacher, like, why are we learning this? They don't really have a very good answer. It's just cause it's like part of the syllabus. And I wanted to have more of a say in why I was learning the things I was learning and to feel like it was useful to me. And that was basically Minerva's whole mission statement. And I felt like it spoke to me very much. I also really wanted to travel, and not just to like a boring, okay, it's not boring, but to a place like London, which is nice, but all of my friends, because I did A levels, like a British syllabus, like all my friends are there, and you only get to see one place. And I wanted to really like see the world beyond just like living in Malaysia. So it's like hit everything that I really wanted. And they also promised that most of their graduates would get jobs. And that's the point of uni, right? To get a job afterwards. I'm like, they have everything.
Yeah. I will actually take this opportunity to a much deeper dive into high school, Lilian. And so we'll rewind back quite a few years, honestly, go down memory lane and get into like Lilian in 11th grade or 12th grade. Walk us through like the entire thought process of, firstly, the first sort of more technical question is how you actually came across Minerva. But I'm sort of more interested in the entire thought process of ultimately choosing Minerva and narrowing down that this is my school which I want to go into.
Yeah. So I did my A levels, which is, we call it like pre-university in Malaysia. And it's also like British syllabus. I didn't know what I wanted, so I did like 5 A level subjects. Typically, people do 3 or 4, but I really liked what I was studying and could not make a decision. So I did like all the sciences, and I also did like English literature, just because. And then when I was applying for university, the natural course would be for me to apply to UK universities. But when you apply to a UK university, you need to pick what major you want to do or degree that you want to do. And if you were to change partway, you have to start again from first year. Or you have to do some weird transfer thing, but it would really slow you down. And I did not know what I wanted to study. There were like many different ideas I had, but honestly, I needed to explore more. Then I applied to like 4 other US universities, but every single essay or application, they ask you to tell them why you want to be in this particular university campus, why you want to study in this degree, even though you don't have to actually finalize it in that first year. You still get to do a more like exploratory first year, as is the way with like US universities. But you would basically be picking your university based off of like an intended major. So I was kind of lost in that sense, and I ended up submitting like 10 or 11 sorry, I'm going to rephrase that. I ended up submitting 10 or 11 applications for different universities, but I kind of knew that they weren't very strong because I didn't have a very solid reason for wanting to be there. And then there was a US university fair that was held at my college, and I saw a booth for Minerva with a bunch of Minerva alumni who were from Malaysia. There were so many Malaysian alumni who were in Minerva in the beginning. It's like insane. I don't know how they managed to convince so many people from Malaysia to do this. I spoke to them and I was like, wow, this university really spoke to me. And I just applied for it. And even through the application process, I was like, they're like asking me all the questions that actually make me feel excited to be there. And when I got accepted to this university, Minerva, it was actually on my birthday, which is amazing. Best birthday present ever. That was like a no-brainer for me. I just accepted it. It's like the only university that I actually really wanted to go to.
When you say Minerva spoke to you, say more about that. What about like the model spoke to you?
Yeah. So Minerva's, I guess like the mission statement at the time when I was applying, or the problem statement rather, was that many employers say that university graduates come out without the right skills to do the work, and many university graduates come out of university feeling as though they are not equipped with the right skills, so they're not ready, they don't feel ready themselves either. And what Minerva was trying to do is give university students practical knowledge and also a space to practice and apply these skills, such that when they graduate from university, they're actually prepared to do the work, or prepared to go out and like start their own companies or do useful and meaningful things with their lives. They also believe that learning is not a passive process, it's an active learning. It requires students to be engaged, and their motto is like, 100% of the students engaged like 90% of the time, or like 80% of the time, something like this. Which means there's no lectures, there's no exams. It's 100% discussion-based, assignment-based. It's all about actually being able to show that you know what you're talking about, or to at least have the space to practice this. And I hate exams. The time pressure, I don't work well under pressure, I think. And the time pressure of exams just really killed me. So everything about this was just like, yes, this is what I'm looking for.
A lot of students come to Minerva specifically for reasons like this, as to like being very sick and tired of exams, sick and tired of mugging up material. Very like adventurous and traveler students also. I just like, I don't want to spend 4 years in one place, in one like box, in one campus, often in the middle of nowhere. And so they love going around. There's a lot of different attractors. I'm very tempted to go on like 5 different tangents with you right now, but we'll take a step back and come back to you hearing about Minerva and deciding to go there. I have a lot of respect for my seniors, especially because when I got in, I could at least say the university was like 10 years old. We've had a couple of classes graduated. A couple of my seniors work in like big tech and have pretty decent jobs. So it was like somewhat easy to sort of convince my parents and say, this is legit. For someone like you, where the Minerva concept was barely like about 2 or 3 years old, was it difficult to actually convince like friends and family that this is legit, this is happening, I want to go here, this is going to be my degree? How was that process?
Yeah, I guess I know many of my classmates who've had this experience where they didn't feel like, or they had their family question whether this was a legit university. I've never had this experience personally. I think that was because the person who I met at the booth, her name is Francesca. She's an M19, and she told my parents that she had rejected offers to go to, I think, 2 or 3 different other Ivy Leagues.
Wow.
And chose to go to Minerva instead. And I think that just fully convinced my parents. It's like, why would a person who has obviously like very bright future, like is going to be accepted in such a great place, choose to go to this university? And to me at least, I didn't really want to go to any other university. I didn't want to have this like experience of being on like an isolated campus, like you mentioned, in the middle of nowhere. And it's often a bubble, right? Like if you look at the Stanford campus, it's its own microcosm. You don't really live in an actual city, you live in like a student town. And maybe that's appealing to some other people, but to me that was not as exciting.
Even for me, I'll be very honest, especially when students and professors take some big names. For example, when professors say that they quit their jobs working at a Yale or a Harvard and came to Minerva, or when a student says they rejected an Ivy League to come to Minerva, or when my seniors say that from Minerva, they are now doing PhDs at Ivy Leagues, that was a big factor for me as well, in terms of Minerva actually can compete at that level with the world's like top universities being just 10 years old. So I think names are important. The beauty of Minerva is we actually have those names where students, even in my class, we have a student who like transferred from Cornell to Minerva, another who dropped out of Berkeley to come to Minerva. And so the first question is sort of why, like even my friends sort of are like, are these people crazy? What are they doing? Why Minerva? But at least it gets you like thinking and questioning. This has come up on the podcast a few times with other guests. I have made that this very statement which you said, that the campus is a bubble, and I feel like many of the guests on my podcast have either not been in full agreement or have actually like disagreed with me in some sense, despite me genuinely think that their campus is in a bubble or in the middle of nowhere. And so I feel like you as a Minervan who's been all over the world, not have a campus, I would love for you to shed some light on this as to speaking to high schoolers, many of whom I'm assuming might actually be going to a place with a campus. In the US, this is often outside of a big city, like it's in a small town, the space, I'm having a beautiful campus, but like why exactly is the campus a bubble?
Yeah. I guess as you go through different levels of education, I think you're meant to gain more and more independence. So in kindergarten, you're like every single second is monitored by a teacher. You never go almost at any point in time being unsupervised. Then as you go higher and higher up, even like your academics is not as supervised anymore. You're free to take like different subjects. You have like fewer and fewer classes. I think professors almost care a little bit less whether you fully do the work or not, because by that time, you're meant to have this intrinsic motivation to do things. And I think in university, a lot of people who I've spoken to who go to different universities where you have a campus, the sense of independence is not fully there yet because you have catered food in the food hall. You live with like housing that's given to you, at least in the first year. I think a lot of places you have to find your own housing in the second year. And if you live in a campus that's kind of like outside of the city, like everything there is catered to you. You have your own library, you have your own gyms, and like everything's like student centered. Whereas in Minerva, we don't have a cafeteria, we don't have a library, we don't have a gym or anything. The city is our campus, is the model, where you're supposed to go out and look for these things yourselves. And to me, at least, that's a really good model because that's how it functions in the real world. When you have to look for an apartment by yourself and you have to find community, find amenities, do grocery shopping, figure out how to do meal planning, feed yourself, clothe yourself, do laundry. I know some universities even have laundry services for their students. And perhaps this is fine for some people who would like to like delay or almost like be maybe this is fine for some people who like to like delay this sense of independence, or maybe they didn't have the choice. But for me, I think this is a really useful way to transition more easily into being an adult after graduating.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna keep stopping myself on this episode. I'm very pro Minerva, to be very frank. So I'm gonna keep stopping myself from like giving too many positive opinions as a host. I'll just be adding in some facts. And so the facts I'll add in here are that in San Francisco, for example, my whole first year, as Lilian said, we have literally just a building. And so if I have to go to the gym or the library or go grocery shopping, I have to step out into the city streets. And a big consequence of that is that I am living in the city like a working professional, plus interacting with so many locals, which is definitely like objectively not the case for someone who's like in a college town. I was bumping into locals every day, be it like waiters at a restaurant or people at the grocery store, people at the library, people in the metro. I was every day like having interesting interactions and conversations with local people. And that has its own set of like benefits in terms of getting to know the city better. So that is what actually is meant by the city is our campus. Like the entire city is yours to claim. You have public libraries, you have gym memberships that you can go and access. If I have to very much just go to the gym, on the way I'll walk, I'll meet two people, I'll see two restaurants where I can take my friends for dinner afterwards. I'll see a good library while I walk there. And so you very much like become part of the city. And so you very much can claim that you have lived there instead of just visited there, I would say, as a tourist. So that is just what I will add in there. Now that you've brought up Minerva's application process, I think let's actually clarify that step by step for listeners. Very different from your typical Common App. I'm sure much more different from your typical UK university application, where from whatever I've understood, it's more focused on just academics and great grades. Other things are more like complementing. What was like step by step? What is the Minerva application process?
Yeah, I will caveat this that it might have changed since I last applied, which was 6 years ago. So like take this with a grain of salt, but or to double check it yourself. But at the time that I applied, the applications were free. I believe they're still free now. And I think the goal of the application that Minerva was designing was to more holistically capture how well a student is able to do or their accomplishments in a way that's not as traditional. So instead of looking at you through the lens of just a grade or I don't know, like this achievement or this competition that you won, they allow you more space to be able to contextualize what your achievements are. So they'll ask you to list, I think it was like 5 or 10 things that you consider achievements. And they also specifically tell you to tell them why this achievement is important to you. And to me, that just showed that they really cared about finding really exceptional students who really care about their education or really care about the impact that they would make after graduating. After that, they had a series of different like logic and creative tests, which are honestly very fun to do. I remember one of the ones that I had was like, they gave me an object and they were like, list 10 different or like as many different things you can do with this object. I think it was a shirt.
Yeah.
And that was quite fun to do. They had a bunch of like logic IQ tests, and then they had this sort of like interview where like a video would play with the question, and then you'd be given like 30 seconds to think of an answer, and then you would answer. And it was all actually quite a fun process because the questions they asked were very insightful, and it felt like they were actually getting to know me. And I felt like I was able to show them like why I was very suitable for this university in a way that I feel like Common App or like writing essays don't quite capture, because a lot of it is gamed. There's like almost like a formula for how you're supposed to write it, or basically they just want to hear like, I've had a passion for being a doctor ever since I was 3 years old, and I've dreamed of going to X university all my life, which is honestly not true for most people.
Yeah.
So I thought this was much better.
Perfect. A few quick facts I'll add on. I know it's been so long for you. This was a difficult terms of a memory test. But a few quick facts I'll add on is Minerva does ask for grades. Your academic scores from grades 9 to 12. That is important. Maybe some people are thinking that Minerva only cares about the extracurriculars and accomplishments, but no, I mean, it's also a very academic heavy institution. Classes are intense. So they want students who perform well in school. From an IB perspective, most of my classmates are above 40 on 45 in terms of their predicted grades. And so it is definitely among the top achievers in terms of academics at their school. In terms of the challenges, as you mentioned, they're called challenges. From whatever I remember, I can just list them out. We have a reading comprehension challenge, which is sort of reading a text and answering questions. There is a logical writing challenge. You write a logical essay based on a prompt. There is, as you said, a speaking skills challenge where they ask you a bunch of questions and you record yourself speaking. There is a pattern recognition challenge in terms of logical thinking. And there's a few more which I'm unable to remember right now. But to me, these challenges were like, wow, like they are testing me on these different aspects of my ability to think in creative ways and logical ways and do good mental math. That's an interesting aspect. We've been hinting at so many different aspects of Minerva's academics. And in fact, I think that's wonderful because this episode, I really plan to do a deep dive with you on how academics and classes and courses work at Minerva. So we'll touch upon many different aspects of that. The very first higher level question I'll ask you is I've been personally meaning to ask you this for so long, which is history and data science. I mean, where in the world do those two fields intersect?
Yeah. Well, I think they are more alike than most people think. So data science is about finding patterns in big data, and historians typically also try to find patterns in big data. The data they work with is kind of different. So with history, it's with maps or art or text. And if data science, it's usually like spreadsheet stuff, or like nowadays like natural language processing, there's like text-based things as well. History uses more of like an analytical, like more qualitative way of like looking through to find what the patterns are. Whereas with data science, it's more quantitative, where you use like computational methods like statistics or machine learning to figure these things out. And there's a lot of intersection between the two because they both add a different perspective. And I think I was inspired a lot, I think later after I had taken the major, to do something like data journalism, where you would combine these two methods to have a really rich understanding of different moments in history or just about humans and our culture. But on a practical note, that wasn't the whole reason why I took it. In the beginning, I was a history and social sciences major, but my parents told me I wouldn't make any money if I did an AH and an SS degree. So I was like, fine, I'll do a CS degree alongside my AH degree, because I am not very mathy. I can do it, but I don't feel like I'm very math inclined. So I felt like if I'm going to do something difficult, I might as well do it with an institution that's going to force me to learn and to teach me how to do things. So I was like, okay, I'll do this.
Interesting. And you ended up with like one of the most mathematical concentrations that Minerva has to offer, which is data science.
Yeah.
Interesting. Just to clarify for listeners, we as Minervans can get into a lot of our short forms, but AH is Arts and Humanities, SS is Sciences, CS is Computer Science. The other two are NS, which is Natural Sciences, and Business.
Business, yeah.
those are our 5 departments at Minerva. Within that, we have different courses. But I mean, no worries, Lilian. I genuinely do this all the time. I'm just clarifying for listeners. The, the current work you're working on, from the very brief description which you gave, I'm assuming there definitely is a data science and a statistics and a programming aspect to it. Do you see any of the knowledge or skills you picked up from your history classes coming into play in the work you're currently doing?
I think it's interesting because the way Minerva teaches history is not like history of a time, a period, or a place. And most people who hear that I did a history degree, they'll often ask me like, "Oh, like what period did you study?" I think most people who study history would have studied a particular like frame, whereas like in Minerva, it's actually called historical forces. So you're seeing history as a lens with which to view the world, and less directly applicable in my work, but more as like in the way that I interact with the world. So every time something happens, or I like read a text, or I go to a museum, I feel like I have a more critical way of thinking about what does this mean in the context of the story that humans tell themselves, and not to take it at face value. Because I think one of the main things they teach in historical forces is that history is told by the winners, or whoever gets to craft the narrative. And it's a lot of powers which are at play that give us an understanding of who we are. And there are a lot of like structural, like political forces that can shape this, but there are also a lot of people, groups who are trying to like write the story, their own stories, and trying to like shape the narrative themselves. And to seeing how these forces come into play helps you understand how you situate yourself in the world, which I think is a really, I don't know, it makes me feel very happy to see, and it's really very happy to go about in the world.
Nice, nice. Let's go one layer down. That was a great sort of high level overview of how history is taught at Minerva. I want to really dive into specifics here. I'm also not going to be pursuing too much of history. I might be taking one elective, but I also have been told this by like all the history professors that Minerva teaches history unlike any other university out there. Even my initial questions were obviously like, which time period are we doing? Which country are we focusing on? How does that work? But like, I guess I'll keep it broad, but how does Minerva teach history? What are your classes like?
Yeah, so in the foundation classes, so the classes you have to take to qualify to take the concentration classes, it's called Global History, where you get a sense of how do you analyze different pieces of like evidence or like text or historical records, and how do you contextualize this with the narrative that different countries or groups tell themselves. So it's less focused on a particular place. I think it's really interesting that the diverse student body really adds to this, because usually in assignments or even the work you bring to the classes, we call them like pre-class work, you're often encouraged to pick a case study that speaks to you. So most people will bring something from their home. So like if I'm from Malaysia, I'll talk about like an incident that happened back home. Or if I'm like from a particular culture, I'll share this with the class, and you get to learn about very different incidents that happen around the world that are both very similar and also have like a unique flavor to them, like with different riots or different ways that like feminist movements have sprung up, or how different groups were able to gain like the right to vote, for example. And instead of like focusing on like hyper fixating on like one period, you see how you can use it as a skill to any point in time or any period that you might be asked to analyze in the future or come across in the future.
That's sort of. I think we've gotten a sneak peek. I'm going to push you even further. You've talked about the intro course or the foundational course of history at Minerva in the arts and humanities. I'm also hoping to take it as an elective sometime. So super excited for that. After taking this foundational course, you have 3 concentration courses in history where you dive deep. So maybe we'll not do like a super micro deep dive here, but on a high level, what are you taught in these 3 concentration courses of history?
Yeah. So one of it is about comparing different historical accounts. So things that happen across different times and places. So this can be like comparing like a feminist movement in one area compared to another, and seeing how much parallels you can draw between them and the lessons that you can extrapolate, or even like different accounts of the same thing. It's about how do you do holistic and effective comparison. The other one is about craft of a historical analysis. So it's about being able to write a really good analysis it's about being able to write a really good analysis, whether it's about a place or time or a period, and really honing your skills as like a researcher. Then the last one, which is my favorite, is about public and applied history. It's how do we tell people stories? How does history interact with the world? This can include like museums, exhibits, books, monuments, like anything that is bringing forward stories from the past to the present day and how that interaction happens.
Yuval Noah Harari should definitely be teaching that particular class. He just want to know stories. I'm. This is something. Please correct me if I'm wrong. This is something my seniors have told me. I haven't experienced this yet. But compared to most other American universities, I've been told that Minerva classes, especially in terms of the actual readings we do and the topics we discuss in class, are generally like mostly not American focused. And so there's definitely case studies from all over the world, different cultures, different backgrounds. Even like a politics class or like a psychology, a history, literature class is text like from all over the world. Would you agree with me there?
Well, not too much in my time. I think that was the criticism that I and a lot of my classmates had against Minerva, was that the academics is very Western centric.
Okay.
I think they do attempt to bring in stories from different cultures, but even when they do bring in stories from other places, the lens that we review them is usually quite Western based. And I think this is a feature of like language, in that all of our readings are in English. And a lot of people who research this, who speak English, will tend to be from like a Western culture. And if they do the translation into English also carries forward like the cultural things. So I think that Minerva, at least during my time, was trying to be more inclusive, but I think it is quite difficult to actually be very global.
I think it's gotten slightly better, but I'm sure there's still room for improvement in this case. Another criticism I would add here is I wish we had faculty from all over the globe, whereas to be honest, even for our class, it's mostly US and Canada, sort of North America centric. I would love to have a professor from in India or from China or from Brazil. I'm sure they bring in their own unique perspectives. Most of the professors, even if they're not like originally from US or Canada, are currently based here. And so there's definitely that plays an impact into how the style of teaching on their classes as well. That's also something I hope gets better as Minerva progresses as an institution, I would say.
Yeah. I do feel like it is slightly inevitable almost, or like it would skew towards that side just because of like English speaking and all that sorts of things. And I think they tried to counter this with the global rotation, where you actually get to meet people who are native and local to these places. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a good add-on. In terms of the international student body, again, here I'll encourage you to stay very, very micro. And so on a high level, I've had a lot of people talking on the podcast about the value of studying alongside peers who come from all over the globe at a very high level. I would love to, like on a micro level, and if you have specific anecdotes or examples of specific classes or courses, that would be awesome. But how does it actually enhance your learning experience when you're studying with someone from Brazil and someone from India and someone from China, and like 20 students in the class are from 10 different countries? Like, how does that change the way the class dynamics work?
Yeah. I guess I mentioned a bit before about assignments and pre-class work and how a lot of the things are like applied. So if you're asked to like pick an example, you're usually like free to pick any example that you want. And most people will pick examples or case studies that come from their own background, their own culture and things they know. So them bringing this and doing the analysis on the same piece of thing, and us drawing, like comparing and contrasting our case study to theirs, helps me to see that it's like first I learned a lot about countries and things that happen, like very micro things that happens in those countries that I didn't even know about. And secondly, I get to see how a lot of the things that happen in Malaysia or that have happened to me are actually very similar, almost like to a shocking degree, to what's happened around the world, which makes the world feel smaller and also kind of like inspires me to think that, oh, like all these political events or things that happen, there is solutions and there's a way that it could be improved. And I guess in terms of having lots of different ways of thinking, everybody comes from a very different, or like mostly different educational background. So people have different styles of learning, styles of speaking, ways that they approach problems, which is a bit more difficult to discern because you don't actually know like if everybody's come from an international school. But it's still quite interesting to feel this difference at the very least.
So are you saying that in the class you actually notice that, like, again, I'm just using these countries as placeholders, but like a Chinese student will approach the same problem differently from like an American student, from like a Brazilian student? Like, do you actually notice these subtleties in a Minerva classroom?
Yeah, I feel like even with like the computational science classes when we were doing like math, I realized that people do division differently in different cultures. I did not know that. I thought that was only one way that everybody did division, but apparently everybody has a different way. And this honestly doesn't change how, it's just division. But it's small things like this that make me think that I'm actually being exposed to a lot more different ways of thinking than I initially realized.
Mm. These are all like these tiny mind-blowing moments in a Minerva class where you're like, someone on the other side of the world has literally been taught the opposite of what I have been taught in my culture. And so when I value XYZ thing, they are told that actually don't value XYZ thing, value like ABC thing, which is like the total opposite of that. Big cultural differences. I mean, I'm talking like West, East, a lot of these aspects of like individualism versus collectivism, at least in our first year classes, have like come up as interesting debates. And then you have the Indians who are pro collectivism and the Indians who are also like pro individualism. That also becomes interesting, like within that country, to have those debates from people. But I think,
But honestly, I feel like this, like cultural differences don't show up as much in classes as it does in the rest hall. So I think because we're a smallish class, it's like 100-ish people, and we all live in the same building, we have a lot of like community events that happen, and a lot of it is volunteer based. So I think Minerva talks a lot about like student driven or student led events, and you can see a lot of the different attitudes that people have towards like when we do kitchen cleaning, or who volunteers to run events, what kind of events do people choose to run, how do people feel about being like forced or like having been voluntold to do certain things, and this like clashes. And when you see different values of people come more to the front when we live as a community as opposed to like within classes, at least to me.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think what we lose in terms of having classes online and not being in a physical environment is like 100, like 200% made up for by living in just one building and literally bumping into each other every single day, having those micro interactions, micro chats, and that, like, when you're living in the same space as someone, I believe you like get to know them on such a deeper level versus, let's say, you're living in two different buildings and then just meeting at class and then going back where everyone is like well dressed and ready and prepped. I think it's a totally different feel of like seeing every one of your classmates in pajamas, seeing them when they're sick, seeing them when they're like in all types of moods, not just in like a happy and a good mood. That for me has been very valuable about the community. And I'm going to stop myself before I go into this whole tangent of social life at Minerva and community, which we also will definitely talk about later on in the episode. I'm going to again bring us back to academics and how they work structurally at Minerva. I want to start by introducing the first year curriculum to all listeners, which is absolutely unique. I haven't seen such a curriculum, even something similar happening at any other university which I've heard of or had on the podcast. So the first year curriculum is very different from even the second, third, fourth year. So just as like a sneak peek, so far in the first year, I haven't taken any major specific courses. I have only taken alongside all of my classmates 4 cornerstone courses. And so very basically and quickly, those are complex systems, which is, I would say, the social science course. Multimodal communications is the arts and humanities course. Formal analysis is the computer science and math and logic course. and empirical analysis is the natural science course. Unfortunately, the business college doesn't have a place, which I think is a problem. I wish we had this intro to business course as well, but that's sort of its own topic. These are the four courses. We also have something called HCs, but I think before I take away too much of this, I'll let you actually take the mic and introduce the first year Minerva curriculum, the HCs, the cornerstones.
Yeah, like as you mentioned before, like HCs are like habits of mind and foundational concepts. That's what it stands for. But there's only 2 letters, which is useful. But I think the reason why Minerva structures its first year this way is so that everybody comes into it almost like onboarded into the same ways of thinking. So I think Minerva believes that there is a set of skills that every person needs to have. And these HCs are centered around specific skills that you would need. And it's usually just like a single word. So for example, like hashtag context reminds you to think of how any piece of work or anything you do should be interpreted within its actual context. Sounds like a very no-brainer thing, like very obvious, but you'd be surprised by how many people actually don't use this or don't remember this in their daily lives. So which is why they call it a habit of mind, because over the 4 years at Minerva and hopefully beyond, you're meant to be at first deliberately or intentionally trying to use these HCs to inform your analysis or inform the way that you go about the world, such that over time it actually becomes like second nature to you. So I think for me, when I write or publish anything in public, I always think of hashtag medium. It's just like ingrained in me by now, because I've had to do so many assignments where I have to justify why this should score well in hashtag medium. I am now like really cognizant that any work I do should relate to the medium or should make the best use of the medium to convey the information effectively. And so the first year is mainly about having everybody do this. I think like a fun fact is that even the master's course, the master's program that Minerva does, their first year or like their first semester is basically our first year syllabus or some variation of it, which just shows how important they feel it is that people gain these skills.
Mm-hmm. I think objectively, yeah, the single biggest effect for me of all the first year students going through this shared curriculum, no one taking a computer science or literature class, despite them knowing that this is like computer science is what they want to do in the future or literature, is that at the end of the first year, every Minervan has this shared vocabulary. And so tomorrow when like you say hashtag medium, everyone knows what you're talking about. And so genuinely what happens, and like this is another HC, but the hashtag emergent property of this is that when a Minervan says, like, let's say when I said hashtag emergent property, you immediately know what I meant, and you don't even know the whole description of what I was referring to. And so we have this lingo which keeps going around in the kitchen and the res hall with whenever speaking to other Minervans, and too many times we say it to non-Minervan and they are sort of like there's a question mark above their head. We can actually like physically see it as to what is going on, what is this person saying. So it becomes like this insider joke. You get 2 great examples, hashtag medium, hashtag context. I think let's absolutely lay this thing out there. And so we've sort of given a great high level overview. Let's provide a few examples as well as define the HCs. So hashtag medium and hashtag context are 2 from the multimodal communications class, which is our arts and humanities class. Do you mind giving like 2 or 3 examples of HCs? They could be your favorites or any memorable ones from the other 3 Minerva courses as well.
Yeah, so from empirical analysis, there is like hashtag right problem, which is about spending time figuring out what the right problem is before you dive headfirst into solving it. And the nuance behind that HC is also around like, how do you figure out what the right problem is and why is it important? Some other things like hashtag networks, which I don't know if you still have, but because they shuffle around the HC sometimes. But it's about thinking of things as being like connected, and there's some like more quantitative version of this, which has to do with like network analysis and being able to literally quantify the effect of a network. And also the more like qualitative side of this, which is like about connectivity and how do you link things together. It's like hashtag confidence intervals wow, like I was not a great FA student in Minerva, but that one really killed me. Like being able to understand what a confidence interval means, and this hashtag is about being able to both calculate a confidence interval and be able to correctly define what a confidence interval is in the context of the problem. And you'd be surprised by how many people get this wrong. And I think this was part of the course as well, like where you'd see so many examples of researchers or like people using this wrongly and interpreting the results like completely off because of this. It just shows how important it is.
Maybe a question that's popped up for listeners in their mind is, why should an arts and humanities student be studying like computer science and math concepts in their first year? Also, on the other hand, why should like a perfectly technical student, a computer science student, be studying like social science, the arts and humanities in the first year? And so, what do you think is the value of having this broad first year curriculum before we dive into like our specific major paths?
Yeah, I think if you want to do anything in the world, these are the skills that you will 100% need. No one, like everybody will need to do problem solving at some point in their life. Even if you rarely touch math in your job, if you do like something completely like arts and humanities focused, you read the news, you like see polls on Facebook, you'll need to be able to interpret these results. And that's just a skill that everybody needs to have. Similarly with like somebody who is completely like computationally focused, you will be reading articles, you will be writing reports, you will be communicating with the world, and you will need to have good communication skills if you want to get things done. So I think this is just like, it also is a really interesting way that Minerva has pitched its education, where you're really actually learning practical things. And it breaks down this almost fake barrier that exists between the different colleges, because ultimately you all have the same skills that you're all learning, you're just applying it into different contexts. But ultimately, it's not an AH skill, it's not a CS skill, it is a human skill that everybody needs to master.
Do you, and this is like a very candid and brutally honest question, do you actually see yourself using most of these HCs in your day-to-day work or in your day-to-day life? Like, do these concepts keep popping up here and there?
All the time, literally all the time. For example, like I mentioned before, like hashtag medium or like hashtag audience. Every single time I want to write even a Slack message, I need to know who I'm trying to communicate with and what they know, what kind of communication works well, how to be succinct. Okay, that's with another HC now, but literally everything I do in life, I can almost immediately think of a HC that's related to that, and how thinking of this HC actually makes whatever I'm doing much better because of it.
Again, from a listener's perspective, something like hashtag audience, hashtag context, it's so obvious and it's such a no-brainer. Like someone who's listening might be like, I use context and I know who my audience is when I'm writing. Why is Minerva making you like study these things in depth over a few classes?
Yeah, I think it's often that we don't catch the nuances behind it. So we might think that we are taking into account our audience when we write something, but these HCs become almost like a checklist. So, and this is a skill they make you practice. So when you do an assignment, you have to justify each HC that you use to be graded on it and to say why you use it effectively. And because you have to go through this checklist at the end or like while you're doing it, it becomes this like, oh, I need to use it, or I need to remember to use it. I need to say like how I use it and why I use it well. So that as you do this over like several tens of assignments over the 4 years and also in classes, it becomes ingrained in you. And you also get the nuances when you get feedback from your professors saying like, oh yes, you considered audience in this way, but had you considered this other thing? Or when you watch your friend apply audience in a completely different way that you hadn't thought of yourself.
For sure. And I think this is probably the perfect place to actually spend 2 minutes on footnotes, which is actually, at least for the first year, I'm genuinely not sure how second, third, fourth year grading works, but the first year, all of our assignments, as you said, we have no exams, are graded just on how well we apply these HCs. And so we get a score out of 5 on these HCs. And that we get the score through how well we've applied it in the assignment and specifically through footnotes we make. And so each of the papers we write, let's say I'm writing a paper and I've been told to use these 5 HCs. I have to footnote each HC at a specific section of the paper where I feel like I'm using it well, and footnote and say exactly why I think I applied the HC well in the paper. So if it's audience, why is this a strong application of audience? So why is this a strong application of context? That's what the footnote is. Do you want to add something about footnotes here?
Yeah, I would say that in later years, it depends on the professor or in the course, like how much you need to spell it out intentionally. So with a lot of CS classes, you don't have to say like I use probability in this way because it's really obvious. But I think the point of the footnotes is to show intentionality, that you were actually thinking of applying this as opposed to stumbling upon like an accidental good use of hashtag audience or hashtag whatever. And I think this is part of like Minerva trying to get you to think really hard about what you're doing and to be really, I guess, like deliberate about constantly improving yourself and like making very, I guess, like intentional decisions on like everything that you're doing.
Intentionality is something that comes up a lot, like again and again with Minerva. The book name is Building the Intentional University. I think what drew me to the university was how intentional they were about every single tiny aspect of the model. Nothing was like just, okay, we followed the norm or we followed the status quo. Everything was like thought out. Even if we are following the status quo, like this is why we are following it. That's a quick note I'll make, but also I think we've done a deep dive into your history course. I want to move into your data science and statistics course. I'm assuming that this was taught maybe like a little bit more conventionally, and so sort of you just covered those same basic concepts. But was there anything super like unconventional out of the box about how you were taught data science and math and statistics at Minerva?
Well, I don't know what's conventional because I never went to like a conventional university, but I can tell you a bit about how we were taught it. So in the CS classes, it's all about practice and applying it to an actual scenario. So I loved the concentration classes, which is like the later classes for CS, because every single assignment and almost most of the exercises was like writing your own coding project. So for example, with my machine learning class, every assignment was about you applying the machine learning algorithm or technique that you learned onto an actual data set and performing your own analysis and then writing a report that's either public facing or for the professor that shows what you found. So you actually learn how to run the code yourself, to set up your own coding environment, to create visualizations and to also like communicate as well to people. And these are all the things that I mentioned are all part of the cornerstone, right? They're all the HCs that you apply into a very specific context. And because you get to use this, because you get to apply the specific algorithm or technique that you use into a novel or semi-novel problem, it almost feels like you're becoming an expert in the thing that you're doing, as opposed to working on a problem that doesn't feel very realistic or very applicable to how I would apply this algorithm in the real world, because I'm working with an actual data set I found off of Kaggle. It also is more collaborative, so you're often encouraged to work on code together with a peer or to get feedback from them, and your professor will often grade your code almost like line by line. But I would say they are very tough. They don't, the professors I've had, they don't let you say you don't know. They don't let you, I don't know, like hide. So they will really just drill down until you give them an answer, which is a bit daunting, but I think I benefited a lot from that.
Sometimes like the things which are hard in the moment become something you're like grateful for later on, as to like, I'm happy this person actually pushed me. I'm happy this person like didn't let me go with a simple high level answer, pushed me to go further. From what you're saying, do you think a good summary of what you said in terms of Minerva classes is you're very rarely taught things like in isolation from the real world? You're immediately taught a concept and then immediately you're sort of like you're using it in a real world case scenario and you're applying it. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I think like almost always. even with like actual math classes, so when we were learning linear algebra, the professor would come up with scenarios where you would calculate things like use linear algebra to calculate the volume of any spherical object that you find at home. So this could be like a water bottle or a vase, and you have to approximate and figure out how you would actually do these calculations. And that was actually really fun because you're like using real things around you to do the math, which feels more applicable than if I were to only work on theoretical concepts.
Wow. And I mean, that's also why I think the IB was a great transition for me to Minerva, because even IB has this huge focus on like grounding things in reality. And so in our whole, for example, like we had exams, but our whole business exam was just a bunch of case studies. And so from the case study, then you have to like define a concept and apply a certain business tool. One of my math projects was actually like using calculus. I 50% don't understand what I did, but sort of on a high level, what I did was using calculus to actually find the exact volume and surface area of like a mud pot in my house. And so I was like learning calculus for weeks in class. I was like, what are we doing? I don't see how I'm going to use this in the future, especially if I'm going into a less mathsy field. And then we used it to like calculate the volume and surface area of something which I drink from every day. So I think that is very exciting and fun to do. What?
Yeah, oh my god, I think I might have called it wrongly. I don't think it was called linear algebra. I think it was called calculus.
No worries, no worries. It's been a while. I'm pushing you. Every question I'm sure is pushing you in terms of memory.
Yeah, memory.
I would say probably, and I would love to like spend a few minutes here with you. Probably my biggest apprehension before getting into Minerva classes was the fact that they were online. Like I was still perfectly happy with 8Cs and a whole year of like this liberal arts curriculum. Everything else was very exciting to me. My only sort of apprehension was, and this is true for so many of us, we've not had great experiences in online school. Those 1.5, 2 years were difficult for me. I zoned out a lot. Everyone's videos were off during class. It was very unengaging. It was very like depressing, boring overall, to be honest. So many of us never want to return to the online class format. Coming to Minerva, this coming from me may not make such a huge impact, but I'm sure this will be a common thread across episodes. But these are genuinely, even though they were online, sometimes because they were online, they were like some of the most engaging classes I have ever taken all through my schooling journey. What is so special about these Minerva online classes? And so this is also the place where you can introduce Forum and say 2 lines about Forum.
Yeah. So Minerva built its own platform, which is like a learning management system integrated with a video calling system, kind of like Zoom. And they had a lot of design features that help to improve or combat the issues that would come from having like a Zoom style course or like an online course. So for one, everybody has to have their camera on. It's like, it's not an option for you to turn it off. The second is that they integrate whiteboards, coding documents, and just like text documents really seamlessly into the platform so that professors have control over what information that students see and how the lesson progresses. Other things are also with like talk time. So the forum measures how much each student has spoken so that professors can kind of like make sure that all students have kind of had some amount of speaking and no one falls through the cracks. And also because the classes have less than 15 people, I think, or like around there, it's easier to see each person and also to be able to tell if somebody is not engaging. Some other things are also like non-verbal kind of communication that you can have in the class that's also not disruptive. So they have really fun emojis that you can use, like Shift3, I think is everybody's favorite. It's just like a snap, and the chat as well, where you can kind of like feel like you're participating and engaging in the class, even if you're not the one who is like currently speaking. Yeah, I think like they've done and like designed all these features in such a way where it's very stimulating, and also because of the style of teaching that they have, where there's no lectures, no one talks for more than 3 minutes at a time, and you're actually discouraged, like strongly discouraged against doing this. It's a much more dynamic place. And I don't know, I think like overall people mostly feel engaged.
Hmm. I think quickly what I'll add is from the professor's point of view, this is something I read in the Minerva book. They have if they press T on their keyboard when they're using forum, they can see
Yes.
talk time. And so they can see, like, I think it's green, yellow, and red as to which
Yeah.
student has been speaking a lot during the class, which student has barely been speaking in the class. And they will purposefully cold call. Cold calling happens a ton in Minerva classes. And so there are people who are very pro and very against this, but you will get cold called if you haven't spoken in class and it's been like 40-45 minutes. You can absolutely expect to just get cold called. Everyone will speak at least once and mostly twice or thrice in every single 90-minute Minerva class. Yeah, so forum is genuinely, and I think the thing about forum is you sort of have to take a class and then you realize, as much as we talk about it here, once you actually take a class, you'll realize like the different features you'll see them in action. Because 100 times I'm asked like, why not Zoom? Like, what's the difference, forum versus Zoom? But they are genuinely like worlds apart, and like that is very much an understatement.
I
uh,
will say that, like the company that I'm a part of, like Blue Dot Impact, we run online courses. So we use Zoom and we use Google Docs. And I really wish that we could use Forum because the fact that Google Docs and Zoom is not on the same platform and you can't collaborate on the same doc and that you can't pick what you show to students, it just makes the communication and the potential for miscommunication much higher. And it's just less engaging because you're unable to tell and you have to manually or like do it yourself. Like, has this person spoken yet? Have you spoken yet? Like, who is raising their hands? And having different ways for people to communicate is just really hard to keep track of when you don't have an integrated platform the way that Minerva has built.
Yeah, I think that's a great add-on. Let's take a typical 90-minute Minerva class and like fully deconstruct it. Almost sort of like not minute by minute, but sort of through different sections. You can take any example like history class or any example data science, math class. For over the course of those 90 minutes, what are like the different sections or components of that class?
Yeah, I think I'll go with like a math class because that's the one I remember the most and the structure is the most similar across. So you show up to the class, and before you come to the class, you're expected to have done the readings and also some exercises that would prepare you for whatever is going to be discussed during the class. The professor will put up a poll or give a short introduction about what you're meant to be learning in that class. Put up a poll, and it's like a pre-class poll that's based on the materials you were supposed to be preparing before the class. So if we were learning about derivatives, it would ask you to solve like a simple derivative problem and also give some explanations for why you did certain things. And then we'll debrief the problem together as a class. And then the professor will send each person out into breakout rooms. So you work together with another individual on a set of problems where you can also from within your breakout room call on the professor if you're unable to solve the problem together. Or the professor is actually in this like control room where they can see each document from every breakout room and also choose to listen to the conversations that are going on within each room. So it's like very cool. I honestly wish that we also had this feature like in the courses that we run. Where they can like pop in and like offer advice or help or nudge people if they are just chatting away and not actually doing the work to actually do the problem they're meant to be doing. And then we'll come back after, I don't remember how long, but after some time and discuss the problems together. So whichever questions that you weren't able to solve with your pair and also for people to teach each other what they've learned. So it's like a really collaborative class environment. And at the end, there is a reflection poll where the idea is that now that you've learned all of this and you've had a chance to practice and refine your knowledge, you should be able to answer like a slightly more difficult question or the question posed in a different context. And it's a way for them to evaluate, like, were you prepared for this class? And also, like, what is your initial knowledge coming into the class? And at the end of it, like, how much have you actually learned? In this way that is quite engaging and also helps me learn because I'm able to apply and like really think through the answers I want to give like each time.
Just as a very quick sneak peek for listeners, we can go very much in depth here, but we won't on this episode. Just a very quick sneak peek as to how grading works at Minerva. As you said, no exams. Majority of the grade is the assignments and the papers you turn in. Some percent of the grade is sort of class participation and engagement, and some percent of the grade, I think about 15-20% is the polls you do. And the beauty about that is you never know if it's the first poll that's graded or the last poll that's graded. And so you're always like high intensity on both the polls because you never know which one is actually going to be getting a score on. But
I would also add that you also don't know if you're going to be graded on the video instead. So we were talking much earlier about why it's more engaging than a Zoom class. And I think it's also because in regular Zoom classes, most people are not incentivized to actually participate. They're like, I'll just not say anything for this whole class. But you actually want to say things in a Minerva class because if you say something good, and usually the grades that you get for speaking are higher than the grades you get from polls, you're going to get a really good score. So you might as well.
Yeah. I think the two big incentives, one is the very direct, like cold call. Someone cold calls you, you're on video, you have no choice. Like if I was off video, I could make whatever excuse about internet or something, but you're on video, you have to answer. Number two, as you said, is you never know sometimes where the professor will just grade one comment you made in the class. And so one, you're forced to participate. Second, you're forced to like think through every single thing you say. And so there's no like half-hearted or bad answers. You never know. I've gotten bad scores whenever I've given those half-hearted or bad answers where I got sort of unlucky. On a lighter note, something that came to mind, which I just want to share is like a Minerva quick story, and there's tons of these throughout the journey. The fact that professors can sort of listen into your breakout rooms is something that we didn't know, especially in the first few classes. And then one of the classes, there's 3 Indian students sitting. We start talking in Hindi for like 2 minutes, just because we're very happy, and this is very low probability. And 2 minutes in, the professor is inside, and he's like, "What's going on here? Are you solving the problem, or you're discussing in Hindi?" So such things happen a lot during all of these classes. Also because it's so small, the professor can pretty much see everyone on the screen. They actually will call you out when you're like looking to the side or when you're shouting something to that side. So in a sense, like that keeps you on your toes, but I think that's the beauty of it, especially since it's online. You genuinely like have to be paying attention throughout. I've been cold called so many times, specifically when I'm distracted, that I know that it's no longer a coincidence that like I was distracted and they cold called me. So such things happen a lot during the classes. What we'll do is to do sort of a zoom in on pre-work and pre-readings, which is something you mentioned at the very beginning of your answer, that you enter each class having done some amount of pre-reading and pre-work. For a high schooler, even an IB high schooler, this is probably a new concept. Most of us in high school, I'm assuming, are used to just going to a class, sitting down for a lecture, doing homework afterwards. At Minerva, it's very different. You basically learn like 70-80% of the content beforehand through your pre-reading and through your pre-work. Then you come to class expected to know most of this content, understand it, most of it, even though some questions and doubts are okay. And then the class is spent sort of debating and discussing what you've learned. So I would love if you have anything to add on pre-work and pre-reading, and sort of why does Minerva want you to learn the concepts beforehand when sort of the classroom is for teaching the concepts?
Yeah, I guess the motivation behind this is to offboard all the boring parts. So a lecture is really boring because it's like, I could have just read the article about this, or I could have like watched the actual lecture over like at 2 times speed, where I can go back and forth and learn it at my own pace. So these pre-readings are basically teaching you all the content that would be in a lecture, but in several different mediums, and for you to be able to learn it at your own pace and to go down a rabbit hole and deep dive into one part if you need to, and to look for additional resources for a particular like thing that they're trying to teach you that the original reading doesn't offer you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the exercises are a way for you to almost like test your understanding. Like, did you actually take from the reading what you were meant to take? And also to kind of like prepare you for doing things within the class. So instead of spending like 10 minutes thinking of your answer during the class, which is wasted time, honestly, because if you're all together, you should be spending your time actually doing productive discussions. You offload that time to the students to do whenever. Earlier. and then paste their answers in. Or yeah, essentially that.
Let's take a history class example. Let's say you've done pre-readings beforehand and you understood XYZ concept. I don't know, you understood like, let's say how to read a primary source, like a newspaper. What actually happens in the classroom? And once you've entered the classroom, everyone sort of knows what's going on. Everyone has those basic concepts and tools. Then what happens in those 90 minutes?
Yeah. So then the class is focused on going more deep into the thing that which is the learning outcome or learning objective for that session. So if it's about being able to read primary sources effectively, you might go to examples of different primary sources and have different people in the class try to interpret it. And then the professor will give guidance on like, oh, you could have like talked about this as well, or you'd missed this aspect of it. So you get a much more like practical ability out of it, and also more nuance than you would have gotten from reading it alone. But instead of having to do all the foundational stuff within the class, which is not the most effective way to convey that information, you do that before by yourself.
I think in my case, what I've loved about the pre-readings is an opportunity to also sort of customize your learning experience. And so let's say there's a class where I really want to deep dive, like I'm super interested in this content, I want to go down some rabbit holes, I can go ahead and do all the optional readings. Versus if there's a class where I'm not so interested, I know I just want to get a basic understanding, that's enough for class, just skim through, I can skim through. Also, if there's a class where like I know pretty much what's going on in terms of like, let's say I've done economics before and now we're doing an economics core class, I can also go very quickly through the pre-readings, which is not an option when like everyone is going to the same lecture, where everyone is on the same level. That is a little caveat I'll add there. We've been throwing around a few terms. We've been throwing around terms like active learning, science of learning. You spoke about how lectures completely like aren't effective and aren't boring. And sort of discussion is the way forward. And so let's expand a little bit on these terms and how do they practically come through in a Minerva education?
Yeah. So I think the Minerva curriculum or like education model is like based on the science of learning, which is like research done about how people actually learn. And in the book, Building an Intentional University, I think they talk about like two maxims. And these are also the things that it's part of the core classes that we all learn this. Two of the maxims out of this, or the two core concepts, are like think it through and make and use associations. So think it through is about really engaging your brain into thinking of an answer as opposed to doing something passive, like just reading the text or doing some vague pattern recognition, which I feel is a lot of Duolingo. Is like randomly remembering like, oh, I recognize that character, so this must be the answer. They really want you to form strong connections in your brain for each piece of knowledge. Then the make and use association is about tying all those knowledge together to make it easier for you to store the memory and also to recall it when you need to use it. So things like mnemonics or like contextualizing something that you've learned to something that you already know is kind of like having a hook into this information, so that's easy to retrieve it and pull it out from your brain like later on. And because they teach us this way and to understand how we learn, they're imparting to their students like the meta skill of learning how to learn, which I think is really useful because learning is, like a lifelong process. And the sooner you start thinking intentionally about how you learn, the more you can refine which way of learning or which methods of learning work best for you. And you become a more efficient and effective learner, like moving forward.
Did you ever in those 12 years of schooling have even one class on learning how to learn, or was Minerva the first time you came across this?
I think it's the first time. I think lots of education institutions expect you to figure it out yourself implicitly or almost by trial and error, where I don't know how many people even realize this, where if you just read your textbook over and over again, you don't actually remember as much as if you take notes, but in your own words. And that highlighting a bunch of stuff on your textbook does nothing for you, and you should instead be doing like more problem sets. But I feel like these are more like implicit things that people learn, and it's not because they know this works because of X, this works through trial and error, which is a much less effective way of figuring out how best to learn.
Now that I think about it, I think even my IB classes, we had classes called Theory of Knowledge, where we dived into sort of knowledge and what knowledge is and the different aspects, different types. But I don't think we touched deeply on sort of learning how to learn. I think the best students figure it out, as you said, through trial and error, that this works and this doesn't. And unfortunately, the majority of students I found, even up to 12th grade, don't even know how to learn, don't know how to engage with content. Unfortunately, I think that's a big failure. Like, I feel very upset about such a thing when we have the research clearly out there that like lectures, passive consumption of information isn't working. We need discussions, we need active learning. It's much easier to say than like integrate into a classroom, because a lecture is very standardized and like 10 different people can give it. But Minerva professors need to be specifically trained in how do you engage a class in 90 minutes of thought stimulating discussion. In fact, now that I brought up Minerva professors, I think it's worth spending a few moments here. We've been talking so much about the content and the class, but I think what's so important, especially for the Minerva classes, is who is leading the discussion, who is facilitating the discussion. That person, like, if you ask me to do it, I think I would like not be able to. Like, I think it takes a very high level of expertise to be able to facilitate a 90-minute Minerva discussion when everyone comes in pretty much knowing 80% of the content. If I guess we'll start with the basic question of, from your experience with various Minerva professors, what do you think are some common traits which they all share?
I think Minerva really vets their professors, and they try to find professors who are first of all like really on board with the idea of active learning, so able to lead discussions and really try to engage students. And I think the best professors I have are those who are very good at summarizing discussions. So they will invite lots of different students to say things, and you get a sense that, there's like all these great ideas floating around, but you can't really pin down like what have we actually learned from this discussion? And then they just say one sentence, and it's like, yes, that was the essence of the entire discussion, and they were able to do that. I think it's also to do with like time management and like multitasking. So being able to do many things at once. Like, one, know where they are in the lesson plan. Two, like work with all the controls in forum. Like, three, like manage like who hasn't spoken or who is going to be speaking next. And also like while the person is speaking, being able to give them feedback on what they've said and connect it with everything that's been said so far, plus the learning objectives. I think it takes like immense brain power to be able to do this. And I actually did teach a Minerva course. I taught the Minerva high school program using forum. I taught them like social emotional learning, and it was really difficult.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure. I'm glad you had that experience when you sort of got into the professor's shoes. Many a times we don't like appreciate how much is going on in their mind. All we do is show up to class, go through it, say a bunch of things which we think are smart, and sort of they are like facilitating this whole mechanism. Also making sure that like in a discussion, it's very easy to go off topic, to spend 2 hours going down one tangent. They have to also at the same time ensure we cover what we need to cover for the class. I think the very last thing to sort of deconstruct on this episode in terms of academics, I think we've touched on like so many bases. There is still a lot we've missed, but I think for now this should give a pretty decent gist. If someone wants to go even deeper, like definitely buy the book and read that. The last thing I'll touch on, which I think is a beautiful aspect of the Minerva model, is LBAs, or location-based assignments, where we use also because we're like in 7 different cities over the 4 years, we actually engage with the city we are in for these assignments. A lot of people ask me, why don't you like take classes from your home in Hyderabad? Why do you go to these different cities, especially considering your classes are online? Then I have to explain to them things like location-based assignments and civic projects and all of that. Civic projects is a term I'll leave to the side for now. Forget I said that, but we'll cover that in a future episode. Say a little more about LBAs, and please give us like 2 or 3 examples as well.
Yeah, so I guess location-based assignments are a way to connect you being in a city with like the academic portion of things. I don't think that we go to global rotation because of LBA. I think like LBAs come out
Yeah.
to make use of the fact that we're on global rotations. Um, I think it's a really nice way to encourage students to connect with the place that they're in. So, for example, for one of the political science classes I took, the LVA was to analyze a political event that was currently happening in the city. So you have to go and search for demonstrations or like political rallies or things that were happening. And I got to attend a political rally in Korea. I didn't understand anything. I had to try to find somebody to help me translate the audio that I took when I was there, and like feeling what it was like to be at a rally was, and especially in a foreign country, was just such a unique experience to me. And it also, I think, added a lot of color to my analysis in the way that if I had just read a news report of a rally, which is already interpreted by somebody else, would have been something very different. And I don't think I would have thought to engage with the city in this way. Another example is like for one of our history cornerstones, concentration classes, the LBA was to design a historical walking tour and to run that historical walking tour for your classmates.
Wow.
So it's like this place that you're living in, you see all these things. And I personally love walking tours because after you do them, you don't look at the city the same way.
Absolutely.
And you're able to create this experience and also show that to your classmates who would really appreciate this new perspective that you would give them. So that was quite fun. Yeah.
One example from a data science or a math class, if you don't mind.
Oh, that's a bit tough. I think for me, a lot of my concentration classes for CS was when I was during COVID. But even during COVID, I guess they adapted it to still work. Where for my machine learning class, I think it was to take pictures of the same place, same position at different times of the day, and to do some kind of analysis based on like the shadows. I don't fully remember it, but it was also trying to, I guess, get you to use your surroundings in that sense.
One example I can provide from my like intro to CS and math class, the first year course was this beautiful, we were learning about algorithms, things like hill climbing and greedy algorithms, local optima, maximum, minimum, gradients. And so we had to actually design and run an algorithm where we started at a certain point in the city and we then have to reach either the highest or the lowest point in the city. And so we learned how like often algorithms will help you find local maxima or minima, but not the global maxima or the global minima. And so also, and it becomes much more complicated if you try to find like the highest point in the whole city versus a single neighborhood and so on. So I think very creative, like these assignments have so much of thought that go into them, even the non-location based assignments, that I genuinely enjoy doing a lot of them. I guess some of them are tedious, but that's also more just my personal bias against a certain topic or course. But especially the arts and humanities and the social sciences assignments, I've absolutely enjoyed. A lot of them are not only written, like you have to make videos or podcasts, make a certain piece of art, and so on. So as you said, hashtag medium. Yeah, I think this wraps up the entire section on academics of this episode. We have a few more questions to go, and then we'll begin wrapping up and move to our fast fire. But we're sort of not done picking your brain yet. The This is something I promised that we'd come to, and it's been like about 30, 40 minutes, but much way back in this episode, you mentioned social life and the international community at Minerva. And so I would love to spend a few moments there. Again, a few facts. Minerva as an institution doesn't have this quota. So there's no number of like compulsorily we need this many American students because we're an American university and only the rest is international. Whereas like a Stanford, I think, has a 70 to 80% like has to be American students and the rest 20 or 30 can be international. That truly makes the class diverse. I think so far in all Minerva classes, there hasn't been like one nationality having more than like a 30% representation in the overall student body. And my class has like students from 60 plus different countries, as you mentioned to me before. Countries you haven't even heard of, like Moldova, and like Kyrgyzstan, and in your case, I think this was Georgia and Armenia. So, I mean, what truly has been, especially since you've graduated, you're also in the working world for 2 years. What has been the value of like spending 4 years with students from like all these different countries versus if you were to spend all your time with like a set country of students?
I think it's just like a lot of things to share. I think a particular example I have was with like Lunar New Year celebrations. So in like Malaysia, we celebrate Chinese New Year, but we say Lunar New Year in Minerva to be more inclusive of other people. Lunar New Year celebrations, which is quite important for a lot of like ethnically Chinese or like culturally Chinese people, or people who, do celebrations by the lunar calendar. And we had a Lunar New Year 1001, but I guess we're not explaining what a 1001 is in this place, but it's basically like a little community event that we had where we set up booths around the whole rest hall and decorated the rest hall with these like Lunar New Year decorations. And the whole thing felt like a booth where we gave people coupons and they could go around to the different stalls and sample different foods that are popular for different cultures at each time. So like in Malaysia, we have Yisang. It's only around for New Year. In Philippines, I think my friend made like mian gao. I think for China, there was something different. For Korea, for Japan, for Vietnam, they had something very different. And it was really fun to see a celebration, which is like my favorite holiday of the year, celebrated so differently in every different country, but also having still a lot of things that are very similar with like the kind of decorations that we use or just like the significance that it has for us. It's just quite fun.
Beautiful. I really hope we have something like this over the next 3 years at Minerva. We haven't had anything like this so far. I also think listeners will be very upset with me now that you've sort of given us the hook of the 1001. I think we should go ahead and sort of ruin the suspense. Let's define what is a 1001 and let's also define what is a Minerva talk.
Yeah, so I guess 1001 is a community event that is meant to encourage students to share about their culture, their country, their religion sometimes with other people, and to give them a slice or a taster of like what that looks like. And typically there's a budget, and most people will like cook food that reminds them of their country and give a short presentation about some specific thing there, or show them games that they usually play during that time of year. And a Minerva Talk is also a different kind of community event where you encourage members in Minerva to share their story. Basically, they go up in front of everybody and give a talk about their life. Kind of free form. It's actually very interesting to see the different aspects of your friends that you didn't have the chance to discuss before. And also sometimes people share very personal things about themselves.
Mm.
But it's a good way to connect with people on different levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are our two big like community events. So after a whole week of like studying and everyone sort of grinding in their own rooms, I think it's a beautiful way for the community to come together on a Sunday evening before another intense week. Sort of come together, have a lighthearted moment together. Did you give a Minerva talk over the?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Was that just about your life in general, or was there a focus point?
Yeah, I think I did on a very tough episode I had in my life. Yeah, when I was in Seoul. Yeah.
I think that's a sneak peek into social life community building at Minerva. There's definitely a deep dive on this aspect on the next episode, which I'm doing with your classmate Julia on Minerva, and so that's a very different deep dive. That on that episode we'll be talking a lot about the global rotation and social aspects and community events, civic projects, a few terms which we sort of brought up here, but sort of kicked to the corner as if like forget that we ever mentioned this. I think we'll begin wrapping up, but I feel that a lot of the conversation has been a lot of positive aspects and pros about Minerva. I know as people, we both are pretty pro Minerva, very grateful for education here. I personally, I don't think I would thrive in any other university you threw me into now after spending a year here. But I think very valuable also to talk a little bit about the other side. I know this is like slightly challenging for you, especially, but I want to push you and ask if you feel there are any limitations or any drawbacks of the entire Minerva experience.
Yeah. I guess I don't think that Minerva is the right university for everyone. Though I do think that what they teach is right for everyone. Like everybody should learn these things. I don't think this model would suit everyone, especially if you are not a fan of lack of stability and having to move around a lot. Or if you're like already very determined and you already know what you want, it could feel a bit like a waste of time. So for example, if you want to do like a medical degree, it would take you much longer if you were to start with Minerva. Though I do think that the skills you learn from there would be useful. I just think it would take you much longer to get your medical degree. So yeah, I think that's one of the things.
For sure. I know people who spend like a week or a month and then realize that this is absolutely not for them, and they head back home and they go and pursue a traditional university education. So generally, I've seen my classmates very early on either feeling like I love this, I know I love that I'm here, this is the place for me, or on the other hand, like this isn't for me, I'm not gonna enjoy this as much. A few people get tired of the global rotation. That is very normal. I genuinely think like seven cities sounds fancy, but as you go through, like each having to shift home base every 4 months is also less glamorous than it sounds in some aspects. So it's emotionally draining in that sense. Definitely not for anyone. On one side, you said people who sort of want more stability probably should not come to Minerva. Any other like types of people or qualities that people would have which you think maybe these people wouldn't be a great fit for Minerva?
I think if you're expecting the coast by and have an easy university experience, you probably don't want to be here because it is quite tough. Like the academics are quite tough. I think like you being surrounded by very hardcore people can feel quite stressful or I think that there's a lot of talk of imposter syndrome in Minerva.
Yeah.
Similar to I think like a lot of other universities. And I think a lot of it, the independence piece I mentioned in the beginning. So if you're not ready to be a bit more independent, I think you can find the transition a bit difficult. I do also know that the logistical challenges of moving to different cities is not equal for everybody. I know that lots of people with weak passports were not able to actually be a part of every global rotation city because of like political things and not being able to get a visa and all those sorts of things. So if the global rotation itself is like a really important thing to you, maybe you also want to talk to other alumni who are from your country to see how feasible that is for you. Yeah.
That's solid. Yeah. Minerva could have gone like either very downhill or very uphill. In my case, fortunately, it went very uphill. But the background I came from was very sheltered, very, very comfortable. I spent 18, 17 years of my life at home. Also in India, we have sort of help to do everything. So I had never cooked, never done my laundry, never cleaned my room, never used a vacuum cleaner like you won't believe before coming to Minerva. I came, and for me, it was just an insane amount of exponential growth over a year. I'm very aware that it could have gone completely downhill and it could have been way too overwhelming and stressful, and I might have just like switched out. I know a lot of people, and this is sort of if cost is not the biggest factor, my biggest suggestion to people is spend a year in San Francisco. The first year curriculum is very valuable. As you said, I think everyone should go through it, regardless of whatever their professional plans are. And if it doesn't work out after that, it doesn't work out. And maybe that becomes like your gap year and you switch to a more traditional university with an interesting experience of having been in San Francisco and learned interesting concepts. So maybe that's the path to take for some people. But everyone's journey is different, I think. Some people get tired after day one, some people after week one, some people after year one, some people after year three, and some people cruise through, no, not cruise through, but sort of enjoy and cherish all 4 years. But I won't deny that, and I'm sure you've experienced it, that it absolutely like builds you as someone who's ready to go out into the world, live in any place, deal with anyone, take care of their food and logistics and all of that. Versus genuinely, I feel like the jump as the jump from high school to university is a bit intense. I feel like for most university students, the jump from university to adulthood in the workforce is also a bit intense. As a Minervan, I think we have a slightly easier like jump compared to many of our friends and peers. Do you think you agree when I say that?
Depends on what university you go to, I guess, because I think there are universities where you have to look for your own housing in second year, so that makes the jump like less bad. It also depends on like what your university experience is like. But if you were living in a hall or a dorm where all your food is catered and you get all your laundry done for you, and like everything is like already kind of packaged for you in that sense, it can make like moving to adult life a bit more difficult, but not impossible, honestly.
Mm-hmm. We spent some time on high level challenges of Minerva. Again, let's go a step down and talk micro level. What are like day to day challenges and struggles of being a Minervan? And I have a long list here, but I guess I'll start with you.
No, I think I struggle maybe with like money because we live in such expensive places. Maybe in like SF, I often found it like quite difficult to be a part of the city just because like every meal you eat out is like $20 plus tip, not even including like service charge or whatever. And like converting back to currency back home, that's like the cost of like a really expensive meal, and that's a lot of money to pay for eating out. So it kind of actually limits what you can do, and you're encouraged or slash like forced to find free slash cheap things to do, which is honestly like a fun little adventure because you go
Yeah.
around with your friends, like figuring out which events give free food and where to get the best deals, which is quite fun in itself. But it does make it feel a bit stressful, especially if you come from like a lower income background. Like this constant pressure and fear of like money can be a bit stressful for people, especially like with some people are given work study where you work up to 20 hours or 10 hours a week, and you're paid an amount, but then you'd have to work on top of studying, and the academics is quite challenging. Work, study, and also like enjoy yourself in the city. Just like an insane amount of things to do altogether. So it does get a bit stressful in that sense.
I think day to day life becomes challenging. Start of the semester, it's okay, but especially when academics like starts to bog you down. I think the biggest, if I were to say, the biggest challenge about moving from high school to university was like even in IB there was tons of work and I was stressed, but I was at home, and so I was like just going downstairs one floor, getting my meal, sort of laundry was taken care of as it is, cleaning was taken care of as it is. At Minerva, what it is like you study for like let's say 3 4 hours, then you have to clean your room, then you have to cook dinner, then you have to go out and do grocery shopping. That sort of all piles on top of each other one by one, and so just daily living life as an adult, having to go grocery shopping and having to cook and having to clean and do laundry and all of these things sort of all add up. And I mean, there are definitely points of semester where it's stressful and intense, and a lot of emotions that come into play. Do you feel like yours was a roller coaster of a ride in terms of emotions? Like, was it a ton of highs and lows, points where you felt like you wanted to give up and drop out?
I never wanted to drop out. That was not me. I did like mostly enjoy my time. I think I was like a fairly independent person already before I joined Minerva. So the transition there wasn't super hard. Probably it's just like, no, actually, yeah, no, the transition wasn't like very hard for me. I think like the constant money, thinking about money was a bit stressful, I think. And also, I think because you're in an environment where everybody around you just feels really cool, everyone is so amazing, you often sometimes wonder, like I talked about imposter syndrome before, but feeling like, why am I here? Like, how did I get selected to be a part of this like really amazing community when everybody seems to be like a lot better than me? So you tend to push yourself to work very hard and try to like almost like compare yourself on everything. It's like, oh, this person got this internship to Microsoft or Facebook, and like I don't have an internship at all, and they did this before the end of the first semester of the first year. Or this person has founded like a company before they even joined Minerva, and what did I do before I joined Minerva? So there's a lot of this comparison that kind of like implicitly goes on, and it does, I guess, like eat away at your self-esteem if you're not careful, and you don't, and especially if you don't talk about it.
I I think I'm absolutely like what you just described. I'm absolutely I was in a pretty bad situation at the start of the summer, knowing that I had friends doing amazing internships and I sort of had nothing lined up for the summer. I think I'm in overall a better place now, but there is so much comparison, especially when you're always on. When the moment you open LinkedIn and you see your Minerva friends doing this internship or building this startup, you've gone through the process. Like you've personally dealt with imposter syndrome. What's a message you have for someone like me? And I'm sure this is also more applicable to anyone who's going to a top university with high performing students.
Oh, man, it's difficult. I don't think I ever fully got over it. I think it's important first to talk to people about it. Like, don't suffer in silence. Then the second is to start thinking of like what you want for yourself and what are ways that you can figure out that this is what you actually want. So doing little experiments. So for me, for example, I wanted to see, like, I knew I always wanted to work in an impact focused organization, but I didn't know what kind. So to help me narrow down, I was like, okay, what kinds of companies do I want to be a part of? So I applied to a big corporation working on something that was impact related. And I realized that, oh, I really didn't like the culture of being in a big organization. So now I know that the next time I look for an opportunity, I want to look for stuff that's in like a smaller group where I have more say in the strategy. And then I do work related to like marketing or event management. And I know like, oh, this is the kind of team culture that I like. This is the kind of work that excites me. And I think always testing out the things that you think you like is really important to help you narrow down and focus. Because otherwise you try to open all doors. Like, I'll be open to anything. I'll do any opportunity. And that just means you stretch yourself way too thin. Doing anything means doing everything. And it's impossible.
I like that. Doing anything means doing everything. I also love this. Just a few days ago, I was talking with someone about Alice in Wonderland, and so I was mentioning this quote which the cat tells Alice at the very beginning, which is, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there." And that has like really stuck with me over years. As sort of sounds a little depressing, but it's like a harsh truth about life that you need to sort of have some potential destination or some path where you're going down. But appreciate the advice. I will try it out and let you know how this goes. I'm sure this is the case for like so many listeners. This happens in high school as well. People attending like these top high schools where students are getting into Ivy Leagues around them, versus let's say they're getting rejection offers back. They might be in a very similar position. This is something that goes on, I think, in high school and university and in life at large. So like this is not something that's going away anytime soon. Best to sort of have those your best practices and strategies as well as your mindsets for dealing with something like this.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that you won't know. Like I've graduated and I've been working for 2 years. I don't really know exactly what I want to do. And that's fine. I don't think having lived 18 years of your life that you're expected to know where you want to go. But having some idea of a direction will at least help you prioritize the things that you care about. And also to remind yourself that it's okay to change your mind. You can say that you want to be a doctor and study 3-4 years and do that, and then decide that you don't want to do it. It's better to have that realization now than to force yourself to do things that you don't actually care about, or to, even worse, like do things just because other people tell you to do them, or because that's the flow and how things go.
Speaking about life after graduation, again, as you said, a big worry for Minerva especially is like, will I get a job after graduation, and like how will my life be after graduation? I think in terms of jobs, you've got a great job. We have pretty decent data, I would say, about Minervans being able to find good work. Minervans being able to find great work in like big tech companies and the big names. Also, a lot of Minervans going down the path of academia, pursuing their masters and PhDs at pretty good universities. And so I believe such data is available online. It's worth going deeper into that. But what I want to do is ask you a slightly different question, which is, as a Minerva student, someone who's graduated more than 2 years ago now, both sides of the question, we will tackle this one by one. In what ways did Minerva prepare you well for adult life and for your career? And in what ways did Minerva not prepare you so well?
I guess Minerva did teach me a lot of skills that I find very useful in my work. I think it's helped me to just like be very productive and like effective at the work I do. And I think that I'm able to make like really good contributions because of the education that I received and the opportunities that I was able to get, like the work experience, like doing civic projects, which yeah, we're not talking about, but doing projects with different companies um, throughout my Minerva experience, and also being surrounded by this really strong and like inspiring energy from my classmates. Some things that it didn't prepare me well for. I don't know if this is a cop out answer, but I feel like I had such a great community being in Minerva, living with your friends for 4 years, traveling with them, experiencing so much together, like figuring out what you want to do with life, going through like the best and worst moments together. And then when you graduate, everybody goes their separate ways. And everyone lives in a different corner of the world, and it's like a 10-hour flight to get to someone who you really care about. And you only really get to meet each other like once a year if you really try, or you never know when you're going to see them again. And it's actually quite difficult to find and build your own community because Minerva selected for people who are like all very exceptional and have like similar thinking. Like they're attracting people who are like open to going for this traveling university, who care a lot about their education, care about the impact that they want to make. And it's difficult to find communities like that after you graduate.
Yeah.
I think that's the most difficult thing. I think I'm still searching for this myself, but not really sure exactly where to find this high concentration of people like this.
I think maybe it's not something on a high schooler's mind, and that's totally reasonable. But I think especially as like a freshman or sophomore in college, we start thinking about like our community after graduation. Something I thought a little bit about this summer, which is once I graduate, no Minervan in my class is from Hyderabad as a city, and this is where I sort of see myself spending the rest of my life. And so I was like, how do I create my community in Hyderabad when I know that most Minervans are going to be like literally halfway around the world, and it's going to be an online connection. I think something we take so for granted in college is that if you're going to any good university, it's sort of screening through for certain aspects, and you're getting sort of a tailor-made community for yourself. So even beyond just like thinking about after college, I think when in college, absolutely maximize the community, spend every minute possible with these wonderful people.
Yeah.
It's hard, like for sure, as you're saying, after you graduate to create such communities. But yeah, all the best. I know it takes a while. Hopefully we get somewhere there. I think the Minerva community is a very high standard to meet. But yeah, hopefully we get something along those lines. I know you literally just said it's okay to not have an exact idea where you're going, but it's okay to have like a more vague, high level plan. Have to ask you this question because this is how we end each episode before our fast fire. Just so listeners also have an idea as to where you see yourself going further. Currently working in sort of, would you describe it as edtech impact along those
I guess
lines?
so. Yeah.
Uh, what do you see yourself doing 3 to 4 years down the line? Like, do you think you're going to continue with the same organization, or do you think there's a pivot that's coming up?
I guess it's like an open question and one I've been thinking of myself. Like I really love this team. I joined as like their first hire. So I feel like I'm almost like building this company together with them. And I'm definitely learning like a lot. And I really, really enjoy working here. There's a part of me that sometime in the future maybe thinks I want to be in Asia. There's also a part of me that is not fully happy with just settling in London and wanting to maybe travel a bit more. I think a small dream that I have is to start my own social enterprise or charity or business for a cause that I really care about and can see like a specific way that I would change the world. I'm not really sure. These are all just dreams and ideas. And I'm gonna have to like sit down and like really think about what I want. Probably soon.
No pressure, no pressure. It's been about 2 hours. I think it's high time to start wrapping up. Um, but I genuinely hope that this was a great intro to so many aspects of the Minerva concept. I certainly wish I had this as a student. It would have made my life a lot easier in terms of what is this big word of Minerva and what are these different aspects of the model. So this is part one. Part two is coming up. We've not touched upon certain important aspects. But in terms of academics at Minerva, I think we covered like 70 to 80% of it. The rest 20 to 30%. If you want to re-dive into micro details, again, the book. But yeah, it's been a great episode. We will do the fast fire round of questions, just a few quick questions, and you also can feel free to answer in just one short phrase or one short sentence. If you're ready, we can dive right into this.
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Few of these will be Minerva specific, of course, because I'm sure you have tons of stories to tell over the 7 cities and 4 years. First thing, any funny or any interesting cultural nuance from any city that you learned the hard way?
Yeah, when we were in Seoul, next to our res hall was a restaurant owned by this two people who are the sweetest people in the world, and they really love Minervans. So during, I think, Chuseok, which is one of the festivals in Seoul, they invited a bunch of Minervans over to have like a party, and they like cooked a ton of food, and it was just like so welcoming and so nice. And I had come earlier to help them like roll kimbap or like make other food as well. And I just know it felt so welcome being in the city.
Very cool. I think we bump into so many locals along the way. I think as a Minervan, like if you take advantage of it, you'll have a ton of non-Minervan friends in each city before graduating, which I think is like so valuable. And that sort of global network. But yeah, awesome. That's a good story to tell. I'm sure we're leaving out like many details. Number two is your favorite Minerva tradition.
During Friendsgiving, which is like Thanksgiving, which is like a US American holiday, but we celebrate it for friends. We usually write gratitude notes for each other, and I guess somebody dispenses them where you go and find the ones that are addressed to you. And it's really nice to both receive and write notes for people and just reflect on the past year and all the things you're grateful for this community that you have. Yeah, I still keep mine at home and reread them from time to time.
Yeah, I'm sure they're like very motivational. This is a question I sort of, we as Minervans, we ask this of each other all the time. We ask this to professors, we ask this to our alum. Out of the, I think, 76 head Cs, we've talked about a few on this podcast so far. Do you have a favorite and why?
I think most relevant to me now that I keep using in my work is hashtag hypothesis development. I'm running a lot of our digital marketing, and I found it really useful to have hypotheses that we're trying to explicitly test. Also, surprisingly, when doing bug fixes, going through like a hypothesis-driven approach actually helps me fix bugs much faster.
How does that work exactly?
So it's like when you have a behavior that happens that's unexpected, you go through and think of like, I think this is happening because of this reason. Or like you generate a few different hypotheses and you can work through them one by one and validate or invalidate them. And it's like, okay, then you found the true root cause of the bug. And yeah.
Oh, any one thing, if I made you like president of Minerva tomorrow, any one thing you would change about the institution?
I think I would have more civic projects for students. I think my experiences doing civic projects was one of the most useful things I had done, both to connect with the city and also to gain like very short experience working with organizations in a particular city that I don't think I would have been able to get otherwise. I think that they changed the model after I graduated so that you only do like 2 to 3 weeks with an organization, whereas at the time that I was still in Minerva, it was like a 3-month, 4-month long thing. And it kind of like tapered out towards third year. But I would try to revive this. It is very difficult. It comes with a lot of logistical challenges. But for me, at least, it was one of the best parts of my Minerva experience.
Again, we're going to do a huge deep dive on civic projects with Julia, but maybe this answer doesn't make sense without defining civic projects. So, like in one sentence or two sentences, what are civic projects?
It's basically just like a project that you do together with an organization in the city, kind of like a mini internship, but less formal.
Perfect. That's a good definition. Lastly, this is a question I'll be asking Julia as well. Of course, I have like 10 different answers, but if you had to add one rotation city to the Minerva model, what would that city be and one reason why?
I think I alluded to this earlier, but a city in Africa would be nice. I get that there are a lot of logistical difficulties, at least at the time that I heard people talking about this, but I think that would really help capture the whole thing. Because I think part of what Minerva does is bring you to places that you wouldn't have gone to yourself as easily.
Okay.
And I think like places like South America, for some people even Asia, it kind of feels inaccessible for various reasons. And I think like for me, for example, going to Africa is one of like being in any part of Africa feels difficult to me just because I don't know almost anybody from back home who's ever been. So
Yeah, interesting. Absolutely. In fact, I was just telling my family this that I think like four out of the different Minervan cities, I would never have like even had it on my bucket list to visit even as a tourist. Like would probably be very way down the list. Argentina and Taipei and Seoul would probably never be on the list, and I'm going through them because of Minerva. I'm gonna force you to like choose a specific African city here though.
my geography is really bad. I had one of my friends who I roomed with before was from Nigeria, so maybe Nigeria.
Yeah, awesome. I would actually love to see this couple years down the line, an African city. And so we cover five continents, if not. I think it makes a lot of sense to also be spending a semester in Australia. But Africa for sure, I think. Lastly, if you had to leave one piece of advice or wisdom or insight, like one final message to wrap up this episode for high schoolers listening who are about to sort of make their decisions about university and then get into the world of work. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of emotions, but any one thing you've learned along the way which you want to share with listeners?
Mm. I would say that things will work out. I remember being in secondary school and when I was waiting for my university acceptance or rejections or thinking about my grades, and I felt like if I didn't get a specific grade or if I didn't get accepted into a particular university, like my whole world would end right there because there was no future after that. I think it's quite like a heavy thing to think about as like a 17-year-old. But I think if I had, looking back, I think I would have made it anyway. I think I would have found a way and maybe that way would be different. But if I kept my head up and thought more about what exactly, or some assumptions or guesses for what I wanted to do, I would have found a different way to get to where I am. Maybe it doesn't look like being a part of Blue Dot. Maybe that doesn't look like being in London, but I still think I would have found my own way to do social impact.
And you can never know, right? Because you're currently on this path.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great thought experiment. Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, I feel like I could go on with you for 2 more hours for the sake of this as well here. I think we'll bring this to a close. If a listener wants to connect, like they have follow-up questions about Minerva, or they just think you're a cool person and want to talk about BJJ, what do you think is a good way to reach you?
Yeah, I guess maybe like LinkedIn for these purposes. You can find me by my name, Ang Lilian. You can find the spelling probably in the description for this episode.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your wise words on Uni Unveiled, and was a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Lilian, and just nerd out about Minerva.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think it was really good to reflect as well on my experience. It's been like almost 2 years, over 2 years actually, since I graduated. And yeah, I think I recall almost all fond memories. So
Awesome. All right. That was the episode. To all the young listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you feel more energized, inspired, and curious for the exciting university journey that lies ahead. Stay tuned. Many more wonderful episodes to be released on Uni Unveiled across a diversity of majors, countries, institutions, and speaker profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Uni Unveiled. This podcast is just a small part of a much larger initiative undertaken by my family called Serene Strokes to spread positive sparks of growth, transformation, and joy among all our audience. Check out our official website www.serenestrokes.com. In the description and comments, please feel free to share other topics and questions which you would love to hear about from our different speakers on this podcast. Until then, take care and remember that this big word, university, may not be as scary or as intimidating as you think it is. Thank you for listening to Uni Unveiled.